Hi, I'm Jason Ford from the World Expo 88 Facebook page, and I'm here with Peter Racy. How are you going, Peter?
I'm really well. It's raining down here in Brisbane on this Thursday afternoon, Jason, the 21st.
Yeah, it's good to see. We've got rain here as well. My son up in Townsville says it's raining up there as well, so it's raining all up the coast, which is great.
Well, one good.
So we're here today to talk about a fascinating discovery you've made recently. We've been doing a lot of work lately in regards to the primary industries pavilion from Expo 88 and looking into the history of that. And in doing so, there was something in a lot of the images that we saw from the primary industries pavilion. We always used to catch glimpses of a small ultralight aircraft that was suspended above the pavilion. And I actually do vaguely remember it from when I visited Expo, but I guess I maybe took it for granted because it wasn't the only aircraft that was suspended in the air at the Expo site. And I guess, it didn't really catch my interest at the time, but I see it caught your interest when you started seeing it showing up in all the images, and you decided to look into it a little bit further just to see, where it came from, where it ended up, and that sort of thing. And that kind of sent you on a little bit of an epic research journey. And you found out a lot about the epic journey it took for that ultralight aircraft to end up at World Expo 88. So what have you discovered, Peter?
Well, first of all, I thought I was on a journey of a great barn find. And if I'd been a little bit more diligent and actually Googled the Dalgety Flyer, I would have had a quick answer. But sometimes the fun of the journey is in the mistakes you make, and that was a mistake. But it did end up with a good result. And what I've discovered was that the plane itself in December and January had flown from London to Brisbane, as it happened. It actually landed on the 26th of January 1988. It actually landed in New Farm Park. And I've actually asked David Hinchcliffe, who was the counsellor at the time, if he recalls it at all. And David does look at our Facebook page, and I know that he's probably seen the question I've asked in general terms, but I specifically texted off to him this afternoon with a couple of photos out of the book. And I will actually include in the course of our interview, as I cut and edit the interview, a series of photographs from the book. I did actually take a series of photographs on the iPhone, and I thought I'd be able to flick through them with the iPhone being the screen, but unfortunately the technology and the glare between this and that didn't work. So I'm not even going to try to go through and do that. But there are a series of absolutely amazing photos, and it's an incredible story. I mean, the journey itself is an incredible story. Flying an ultralight that is really made for two people to fly 2 hours. I mean, that's the standard spec of this particular plane that rolls out, that did roll out of the factory back in 1988. And the story itself, the start of the story is incredible. The end of the story is slightly sad. And I might just, Jason, if you're interested, I'll begin with the end because that's the sad bit. So Brian has this epic journey, ditches in the ocean, flips upside down, gets stuck in mud, has all sorts of trouble with customs, and so in a way mirrored all those original problems that the aviators back in 1919 had, and he based the journey on the Great Race back in 1919. And so the historical groundings of of the flight are very interesting. And the first part of the book deals with those facts. And he's a very good writer, and it's very easy to read. Although in the end, he thought he would get into Sydney, finale of his journey, and what he found was that because that particular bicentenary event in Sydney was chock-a-block with tall ships, with flights and F-111s and fireworks and all sorts of different things, he couldn't get in. It was closed airspace, and he hadn't realised.
And at this stage, Peter, had he travelled all the way from the UK?
He was in Australia. He had arrived in Darwin. His support crew, which previous to Darwin were flying in aircraft, going from stop to stop with a spare motor as luggage, believe it or not, and all the tools as a second part of the luggage. So when they arrived in Australia, the support crew, who's man of one, then went and acquired a car, organised some journalists to accompany him. The first fellow didn't last more than a few hours before he bailed out, and then he ended up with an ABC journalist. And they followed by road in a Hilux camping van the ultralight plane. Then it went into Longreach and other significant spots. And so what he decided, so he was in Toowoomba, and there's a bit of footage, which I'll clip into this, of him in Toowoomba. And he decided then that he would go to Brisbane. And when I first heard it, I heard him say New Farm Park, and I'm thinking, he can't land a plane in New Farm Park, but he did. And there's actually a picture in the book.
Oh, right.
Of the plane in New Farm Park, which is the reason why I've contacted David Hinchcliffe, who is the local councillor and a really great supporter of our project. And so he obviously did land in New Farm Park, but he was underwhelmed by the support that the Brisbane official community gave him, and I also suspect that he was a bit underwhelmed by the fact that Dalgety didn't actually organise any official reception for him. Because
and Dalgety, are you suggesting Dalgety were the sponsors or the financial backers of this?
So one of the other things that we'll do is when we start, then that's in the beginning part of the narrative, and it's really fascinating, totally fascinating. So anyway, so he was very disappointed. The plane did end up in Sydney, I think on the 29th. Yep, on the 29th of January. And there was a sponsorship company that Dalgety obviously controlled, and they took possession of the plane. They obviously arranged it to go into Expo 88, and then from Expo 88, they then donated it to the Powerhouse Museum, and Brian says his recollection that it was actually on display out at the Sydney International Airport, and that could be quite true. It's certainly not there at the moment, because the current pictures show it in part of the Powerhouse Museum display. The interesting thing is that Dick Smith played a very important role in the post-era treatment of the plane. And at some point, I'm not going to do it now, but at some point, I'll actually send an email off to Dick Smith, because Brian has invited me to do so and has actually given me like a letter of introduction. So I will follow that up. So now, would you like me to talk about the start of the journey?
Well,